If you've had a neurologic injury and you've ever been told that there is no way you can recover after the first 18 months, or you're going to therapy currently, or you've been to physical therapy, and the most important thing to your therapist is walking speed, then this video is for you. Because in this video, we are going to clear the air or debunk some long-held beliefs in the healthcare system that you have probably been told and are absolutely not true and could be huge barriers in your neural recovery. If you're new to this channel, I'm Tara. I'm a neurologic physical therapist with over 22 years of experience helping people restore their mobility and their independence after a neurologic injury. And if you're new around here, you might not know this, but I've taken everything I've learned in those 22 years and I've put it into a system giving you all of the necessary tools to take full ownership of your rehab and your recovery. To learn more about our membership program or to schedule a discovery call, to speak to someone in person, to see which program is best for you, visit rehab-hq.com. And now into a somewhat controversial video, but something that I'm absolutely passionate about and feel is so necessary, especially when I come off of a couple of months of working with a lot of new patients who come in telling me all sorts of information they have learned from healthcare providers who specialize in neurologic recovery that is absolutely not true. And myth number one is that the brain cannot recover after 6 months. Some are even pushing that out to a year or 18 months. But the premise of this information that they're giving you is that there is a point after a neurologic injury where you should expect that you can no longer build new neural networks, i.e., you cannot make progress. And that is absolutely not true. They say that it takes about 10 years for the scientific research to make it into actual clinical practice. And I think that's what's going on with the healthcare providers who are still telling patients that you cannot make progress after 18 months. It's really based on really old information before we could take really detailed images of the brain, when the scientists really did believe that as an adult, your brain could not form new neural connections, i.e., you could not restore movement on the involved side of your body because your brain, on the injured side of your brain, could not make new neural connections around those damaged areas. We know that that's absolutely not true. There's plenty of evidence that I can confidently say your brain continues to rewire throughout your life, including after a neurologic injury. But I will add to that, many patients I work with are beyond that 18-month window and are absolutely still getting new movements on their involved side. I can name 3 patients currently that I am seeing that are absolutely blowing my mind and making me even more of a believer than I was maybe even a year or 2 ago. Both of these, or all 3 of these, because I just had someone new that's about 3 years out. And then I have 2 patients that are probably about 3 to 4 years out that I've been working with for a couple of years. And all 3 of them have more arm movement in their involved arm now than they did even a couple of weeks ago. Now, there is one caveat to this. All 3 of the patients that currently I'm seeing, and I've had more, been doing this for 22 years. I've had tons of patients that have made me a believer that you can restore movement throughout your life. In other words, your brain does rewire throughout your life. But in all 3 of these cases currently that are at the top of my mind, they all have extremely supportive caregivers. So why do I tell you that? Because repetition matters. So these particular cases that I'm thinking of right now, they are kind of outliers when it comes to their life setup or the circumstances in their life. It's very rare that someone has a 24-hour caregiver that has the motivation and the endurance and the perseverance for multiple years to get those repetitions in of those all the foundational movements that I talk about on this channel. Because in reality, a patient that has had a neurologic injury, in my experience, I've found that if they're working on their own, they have to be extremely motivated. Now, I have seen it, a little bit of a tangent, but the patients that I'm thinking of off the top of my head, they're engineers. And so the two that I'm thinking of, they absolutely are, they think like an engineer. They have spreadsheets and they're tracking all of their movement. And so they're kind of used to like problem solving and setting up systems. So the ones that are doing it on their own, they have a little bit of fuel in their tank as far as their previous life experiences that I think help them to get these repetitions, the necessary repetitions in every single day. So again, outliers, but the reason I tell you all this is there are many of you that are in this situation. You have supportive caregiver at home. You have the drive and the discipline to do the daily repetitions. You have a growth mindset. You're flexible, meaning when situations arise or barriers come up, you find ways around it. Those are all personality qualities that are absolutely essential. If you don't have those, that can also be rewired. So I've made lots of videos on this channel about how to overcome some of the emotional barriers associated with stroke recovery, but even that component, you can build on that. But definitely a growth mindset is absolutely essential, and having supportive caregivers isn't absolutely essential, but it definitely helps. So myth number 1 is that you can't recover after 18 months. Yes, you can. Full stop. Myth number 2, and this is so common. I will say 90% of patients that have been to a traditional therapist in network, in the system, in the US first, and then come to me, have the script down. They have to be able to walk 1.4 meters per second, and that is absolutely the most important measure of success after a stroke. Again, this is based on really old data. I've made a really long video on this recently. I will link that video in the description below. There's a long history behind where that came from and why we have this huge body of evidence suggesting that gait speed is the most salient or the most important thing after a neurologic injury. Again, link for that video is in the description below. But here's the problem. Yes, gait speed is important. They say that 1.4 meters per second, the scientists say this, is correlated with decreased falls. It also is correlated with being a community ambulator. So how did they come up with that? They measured the amount of time that like a crosswalk light signal is on, meaning that you're allowed to cross the street. And they say that 1.4 meters per second will get you across that street in the correct amount of time. I've heard other people say, and I've read other situations where scientists believe that this is important also for like going to the bathroom or getting your needs met, that if you can't walk at this speed, you're more likely to fall. But here's the thing. Many of you are going to therapy and all you're working on is walking fast. Your knee is locking out, you're walking on a peg leg, you have all your weight on a cane or even worse, a hemi walker, and you are developing all sorts of compensatory patterns. And again, I've made a full video on this, so I'm not going to do a deep dive on this, but just know that that is one measure of success, but there are downsides to that. When you work on walking speed, you compensate more. When you compensate, those compensatory patterns get so strong that it makes it much, much harder to restore neural networks on the injured side of the brain. Again, I've made lots of videos on this. I will link a couple of the videos in the description below where I talk about compensation versus facilitation. But I don't just want to debunk myths. I want to give you guys solutions because I know many of you have to go to in-network providers. And unfortunately, that is the standard of care for stroke recovery. And very frustrating for me. Many clinicians aren't just using this for patients that have had a stroke. They're broadening that out to all neurologic conditions, which there's no evidence that has shown that. So I don't know why this is happening, but I see all sorts of neurologic conditions, and it seems like everyone's working on gait speed. Don't really know where that's coming from, but what can you do? Yes, I do think going to therapy and working on gait speed has value. It increases your fitness, your cardiovascular fitness if you guys are walking fast enough. However, you are going to compensate more. So the workaround is that you're doing exercises at home, working on stance control, isolated movement on your involved side. I have tons of videos on this channel breaking down every single movement pattern. And as I've been saying recently in a few videos, it's not because I feel like quality movement or normalizing movement patterns on the involved side of the brain on the involved side of the body is appropriate for everyone. It's because I know the type of treatments that you're getting when you're going to your in-network providers, and I want to provide resources for you to work on movement quality or normalizing movement patterns on the involved side when you're not in therapy. I think that is the best balance, but just know that gait speed is not the end all be all. It has a place, but I do think it's important to also work on normalizing your movement patterns on the involved side. And as I referenced in myth number 1, you can restore normal movement patterns on the involved side. Next myth I want to debunk has to do with pain. And this is a very nuanced topic. I've got two camps of people that I see. There's the camp that says no pain, no gain. So let's debunk this myth first. And hopefully we can land somewhere in the middle. No pain, no gain. That is effective with certain types of pain to a point. You do need to push through a little bit of pain. We call this kind of like exposure therapy. That would be important for people who have a lot of neuropathic pain, meaning, well, there's a lot of different types of neuropathic pain after stroke, but let's just say the type of pain where your stroke impacted an area of the brain that interprets pain. If you never experience pain or you never do anything that's uncomfortable, that pain volume is going to shoot way up. So we call it exposure therapy. You gradually expose the painful area to greater and greater movements or sensory input. That could be rubbing, that could be tapping, that could be the massage gun. You keep gradually exposing, meaning you're going to encounter a little bit of pain that is necessary so that that pain doesn't get worse. When it comes to the no pain, no gain, what I usually see are the people that are kind of maybe were more like athletes when they were younger that feel like pain is a good thing and necessary because that means that they're doing something good. And there's pros and cons to that. I would say when it comes to the shoulder and the arm, I've seen that backfire. A little bit of pain is necessary and is probably to be expected, but if you cross a threshold of discomfort, there is the potential that your brain's just going to shut down and say that your brain's going to start associating arm movement with pain. The alarm bells are going to go off in your brain, and your brain is not going to be as engaged or not have as much potential of restoring normal movement patterns. On top of that, pain can sometimes trigger spasticity. So if you're working too hard, right, the good pain, if you're working too hard, your spasticity is just increasing. And so that's the other type of no pain, no gain kind of personality that I see, where you feel like you need to work really, really hard. And if you have a lot of spasticity, that could be counterproductive. Now let's talk about the other end of that pendulum, that you should not have any pain. And I've seen this from patients that have told me about their experiences with therapists. You say something hurts, and they stop doing the activity. Or you go to your doctor and you tell them something hurts, and they immediately give you medication to medicate that pain away. Here's the thing. Doctors, for multiple reasons that are beyond this video, doctors are motivated and actually incentivized to get you out of pain. Therapists, indirectly, are also incentivized, or the facility is incentivized via patient satisfaction surveys for you not to experience pain. The reality is there's going to be some discomfort associated with recovery. My rule of thumb is anything under a 5, or if I'm not sure what someone's pain threshold is, usually I will ask someone. So ask yourself, what is an acceptable amount of pain where you might feel a little bit of discomfort, but you're not having an emotional reaction to it. Figure out what that number is on a 0 to 10 scale. What is your number of pain that you can tolerate right before you have a negative emotional reaction? Fear, anger, resentment, bitterness, yelling at your arm, calling your therapist bad names in your head, hating coming to therapy or being fearful of coming to therapy. What is that number that's acceptable for you? And then don't go above that. And also share that with your therapist. Hopefully that debunks some of the confusion around pain. Next myth is you need to spend money on equipment to get the neuroplasticity. You need to have these monthly subscriptions to these robotic devices, or even pay thousands of dollars out of pocket for robotic devices if you want any chance at recovery. And that's absolutely not true. In my opinion, I think that money is better spent on a good therapist or trainer or caregiver, someone who can facilitate exercises to get the repetitions in. On top of that, if you're purchasing any kind of device that is taking away from you doing the repetitions, so devices I'm thinking of are red light therapy, infrared light therapy, HBOT. I would even say like the MotoMed, which is just a passive bicycle, and you're like on your cell phone. Seen this more than once. So this is actually what happens. You're playing games on your iPhone as you're on the MotoMed, which means you have no conscious engagement. You have no intentional focus on the actual exercise. Those types of devices, I would say, are almost counterproductive if they're taking away from you doing intentional, focused activities on movement retraining. All of those devices are pretty and fancy. I will tell you the robotic gloves will end up in your closet. I will tell you the FES devices, functional electrical stimulation devices for the arm, will end up in a closet. I will tell you that the tens of thousands of dollars spent on exoskeleton devices in the months that you'll be fighting with your insurance to get those devices approved, the exoskeletons that I'm talking about, will end up in a closet. And some of those devices are $30,000 or $40,000. Build your insurance, of course, but they will end up in a closet. Let's talk about exoskeletons, or the devices that go on your leg and help to facilitate normal movement patterns. You either need to put them under your pants, you need to put this big exoskeleton under your pants, because you're going to have to go to the bathroom at some point during the day. So if you wanted to use that device as like a functional device, meaning facilitate normal walking patterns, which is the intent of the device and how they present it to insurance companies, you're going to have to either wear dresses or buy pants that are 10 sizes too big and put that device underneath your pants if you're a female. Add to that, it adds weight, so it decreases your efficiency with walking. You're going to get fatigued faster. They're very heavy, relatively speaking, but very heavy when it comes to something you're going to have to wear all day, every day. Don't think they're that beneficial. Okay, so fancy devices are really not necessary. Most, if not all of the stuff that I use on my channel to help you design an exercise program, and actually in our membership program as well, are devices that you can buy on Amazon for relatively cheap. Next myth is using an assisted device is a crutch. Or I'm going to throw in here braces as well. Braces and assistive devices are not crutches. Sometimes an assistive device decreases your spasticity and allows you moments throughout the day where you can work on quality movement. More than that, an assistive device can also help you to engage with life a little bit more naturally, meaning that you don't really have to think about your walking as much, and will improve your overall quality of life. So assistive devices have their place. Talked about this a lot in other videos. I would steer clear of a hemi walker. If you've used a hemi walker from the beginning, I would start setting up a plan where you're working off of the hemi walker to maybe like a single point cane or a gait pole. AFOs, absolutely critical to normalize a walking pattern if you have spasticity. There's no way around that. In fact, what I see more often than not is people come out of their AFO too quickly and they end up with more severe gait deviations, and their spasticity usually increases. So tools, braces, and assistive devices are not crutches. They are a necessary step in the recovery process if you really want to normalize your walking pattern. And the final myth we're going to cover today is that if you can't do it perfectly, you shouldn't do it at all. So we're going to swing the pendulum to the other extreme. There is the camp of therapists that believe that it doesn't matter what it looks like, you should just make sure you're getting your walking speed up. We're going to swing the pendulum to the other side and the other camp of therapists, where I kind of bordered on this side for a while. It never made sense to me totally, and I'll tell you what it is in a minute. But there is a camp of facilitation therapists, meaning that they're all about that neural rewiring, and they will not let you do any movement if it's not perfect. So if you can't walk without your knee hyperextending or circumducting, swinging around the side, or without it staying out to the side, or without leaning on a cane, then you shouldn't walk. And that's absolutely so destructive. There's fewer therapists in this camp because it's really frowned upon in the traditional healthcare system, but they exist. And that's absolutely going to hurt you in the long run, because you're not going to get the number of steps in that are necessary to build your confidence up on your feet. But more importantly, you're not going to be getting the kind of like the activity. You're going to be more sedentary, which increases your risk of having another stroke. So I do not buy into the idea that if you can't do it perfectly, you shouldn't do it at all. I think there's a balance here. I would say when you're doing your exercises, use tools, use the videos on this channel of different ways that I've kind of told you how, or different ways I've kind of shown you how to like set up an activity to normalize a movement pattern. Definitely do that and be intentional when you're doing your activities. But if you compensate or do little things a little bit, being on your feet is so important that, yes, I do think that you should still do it. More importantly, that when you do make mistakes, and this is for caregivers as well, making little mistakes that are still safe, meaning someone's not going to fall to the ground, but maybe they like stumble a little bit. When you make mistakes like that, you are learning how to do it correctly. Making a mistake, you're getting that awareness of what not to do, and it's actually training your brain to get closer to actually doing it correctly, especially when it comes to gait and walking. That's very salient for our brains. We don't want to fall. We don't want to hit the floor. So when we make mistakes that cause us to stumble a little bit safely and within reason, we learn from them. So when you're working on your balance, you feel like you're swaying a little bit, that's okay. You're activating the muscles that are helping you self-correct. Now, I've talked about this in a lot of videos, but if you're doing some of the corner exercises that we've done on this channel and you're bouncing off the walls, we stand in a corner so that there's walls behind you and you're just bouncing off the walls, well, that's an extreme where you're not at some point you're not learning anything and you're just reinforcing like kind of really bad habits. So there is a fine balance here, but I am not of the belief that if you can't do it perfectly, you shouldn't do it at all. I think there is a balance. I think there's a middle ground here. You just need to find that middle ground. But that is it for this video. I hope that clears the air on some of the most common rehab myths that most of you are being told. I would say 90% of you are being told, and kind of how you could reframe that information to really optimize your recovery and make the decisions as far as the exercises you choose to do that will help get you to that next level, that will make you feel proud of you. If you want help with that process of doing activities to normalize your movement patterns, don't forget our Rehab HQ Gold membership would be perfect for you. As a member, you get access to an entire vault of home exercises that are the exact exercises that I give to my patients that I see in person, as well as our monthly Q&As where you can ask me questions about your specific movement problems. And sometimes it's just a workshop where we just work through your specific movement problem as a group using the video library to help build that program for you. It's really great. The members love it. But then on top of that, you also get access to our monthly webinars where we really do deep dives into the literature, and I really try and present all the information that I believe is necessary to help you take full ownership of your rehab to really help you get to that next level in your recovery. But to learn more about our programs, to sign up or schedule a discovery call to speak to someone in person, to see which program is right for you, you can visit rehab-hq.com. I enjoyed spending time with you all today, and I'll see you in the next video. Have a good day.